WHGE 95.3 FM coming up, the Open Eye.
Those of us that indulge in or commit intellectual violence don't do so for the pleasure of mental masturbation or ego diddling. We do so because the chains of oppression on our people's minds are deep and difficult to remove.
Good morning, my children of the sun. Welcome to the Open Eye on WHGE 95.3 FM. I'm your host, Third Eye Optometrist, Patrice Gibbs, here to get that third eye open, yes indeed. And as we always start, every generation has its purpose. Ours is to reveal the truth and reverse the brainwashing. And we do that right here on the Open Eye. Right? The Open Eye is not a place for comfort, it's a place for clarity. Every week we gather here to do something simple, but increasingly rare, to look directly at the world as it is. Not as it's marketed, not as it's spun, not as it's softened for easy consumption. We look with an open eye. The one that refuses to blink when the truth gets inconvenient. Because the forces shaping our communities, our politics, our culture, and our daily lives are not abstract. They have names, histories, motives, and consequences. And if we don't examine them, they will examine us and define us without our consent. So today, we open the eye again. We look at the stories beneath the headlines, the patterns beneath the noise, the power beneath the performance. We look at what's happening, why it's happening, and what it means for people who don't have the luxury of pretending it doesn't. This is the Open Eye, where seeing clearly is the first act of resistance. All right. Let me get my disclaimer out the way, and we'll get going here. All right.
The views and opinions expressed on the Open Eye are those of the hosts, guests, and contributors, and do not reflect the policy or position of WHGE 95.3 FM nor our sponsor, the Delaware Center for Homeless Vets. Any content provided by Open Eye's hosts, guests, or contributors are theirs and are not intended to malign any religion, ethnic group, company, or individual.
All right, let's get them started here. Start right here. The richest nation on earth and the hunger at its doorstep. You ever notice how America can brag about being the richest nation on earth? The richest nation in human history, while stepping over human beings sleeping on sidewalks? We normalize a contradiction so grotesque it should stop traffic. Billionaires racing each other into space, and right beneath them, people digging through trash cans for dinner. Private jets slicing through the skies while families ration insulin. Record corporate profits rising like skyscrapers, and tent cities spreading like shadows at their base. And we talk about it like it's gravity, like it's just the way things are. It's not. It's the way we chose them to be. Because if you look around the world, not at utopias, not at fantasies, but at real functioning democracies, you see something different. Take the Nordic states, Denmark, Sweden, Norway, Finland. Market economies, billionaires, global global companies, innovation, competition. All the things America claims to worship. But what they don't have is people freezing to death on the sidewalk. What they don't have is children growing up in motels. What they don't have is the richest 1% hoarding more wealth than the bottom half of the entire country. And why are they hoarding this wealth? Yeah, it makes me think, you ever seen Crossroads? It was about, it was Ralph Macchio, the Karate Kid. And he hooked up with this blues artist who was trying to gather enough money to buy back his soul from the devil. Well, you soulless bastards, you can't generate enough money to buy back a soul that you never had. Why are they hoarding this wealth? Because they made a decision, a moral decision, that certain things are not for sale. Okay? Their morality is for sale. The difference. Why are these Nordic countries, these so-called social democracies, not dealing with this hoarding? Because they made a decision, a moral decision. Healthcare, education, childcare, basic human security are not for sale. They tax wealth and high income seriously, not symbolically. And they use that money to build a floor under every citizen. A floor high enough that nobody falls through it. And here's the twist. Here's the twist Americans never hear. That floor doesn't kill ambition. It unleashes it. When failure doesn't mean homelessness, people take risks. When a medical emergency doesn't mean bankruptcy, people innovate. When the cost of falling isn't catastrophic, people climb higher. Meanwhile, in the United States, we built an economy where the entire system is engineered to squeeze every last dollar out of the people who already had the least. We mistaken cruelty for efficiency. We mistaken suffering for freedom. We mistaken inequality for inevitability. But nothing about this is inevitable. Nothing about this is natural. It's a policy choice. It's a cultural choice. It's a moral choice. The richest nation in human history could decide today that no one sleeps on concrete, that no one goes hungry, that no one dies because they couldn't afford a doctor. Other nations have already proved it works. It's possible. The question isn't whether America can do it. The question is why America refuses to. And that comes down to one word: race. I'm Patrice Gibbs, trying to open your eye. Hey, Vaughn, I see you there, bro. All right. WHGE 95.3 FM. The Open Eye. Patriarchy. You know what that is? Yeah. It's the ideal that men, specifically men, run the society. They are the beneficiaries. You know, I saw this British commentator, white woman. This is an interesting way to look at patriarchy. Because we're usually taught to understand patriarchy as a system created by men for men to dominate women. And there's no question that women have suffered enormously under patriarchal systems. Women have been denied political power, economic independence, bodily autonomy, education, property rights, and basic freedom. And there's another question worth asking. Which men actually benefited? Because throughout history, the king wasn't usually the man dying on the battlefield. The emperor wasn't digging the coal. The plantation owner wasn't cutting the cane. The industrialist wasn't crawling into the mine. The billionaire isn't climbing onto the roof, working the oil rig, laying railroad track, fighting the war, or destroying his body in a factory. Working men are. And once you look at patriarchy through the lens of class and power, something becomes clear. Maybe patriarchy was never simply about men ruling women. Maybe it's also about powerful men controlling everybody beneath them, including other men. Think about what traditional masculinity teaches a boy. Don't cry. Don't complain. Don't show fear. Take the pain. Protect everybody. Provide. Fight. Sacrifice. And if necessary, die. Yeah. Then society takes that conditioning and puts it to work. We send overwhelmingly male populations in the war. We send men underground in the mines. We send men on the oil rigs. We send men in the logging camps, construction sites, commercial fishing boats, sanitation work, steel mills, and other dangerous occupations. And when they come home psychologically damaged, physically broken, addicted, traumatized, or unable to function, we often tell them, man up. Hell's wrong with you? Y'all like to tell us something. Because a system that genuinely valued men will not measure masculinity by how much suffering a man can silently absorb. And here's where the trick becomes especially powerful. Give an ordinary man authority over somebody else, and he may mistake that little piece of authority for actual power. Tell him, you're the head of the household. Now he feels powerful. Meanwhile, somebody else owns the factory where he works. Somebody else owns the bank holding his mortgage. Somebody else determines his wages. Somebody else decides whether his job gets shipped overseas. Somebody else decides whether his pension disappears. And somebody else can send his son halfway around the world to fight another working class man he has never met. But he has been told that he is the patriarch. That he may be the one, he may be one of the greatest confident games ever played. He's the victim of that. Because patriarchy does not distribute power equally among men. It creates a hierarchy among men. A small group possesses enormous political, military, and economic power. Then millions of ordinary men are conditioned to protect that hierarchy while believing the hierarchy exists for their benefit. Oh, Oh, and women absolutely suffer under that arrangement. But here's the distinction. The oppression of women and the exploitation of men can exist at the same time. Those realities do not cancel each other out. In fact, they can reinforce each other. The working man comes home after being dominated by somebody above him and is told that masculinity requires him to dominate somebody beneath him. So instead of looking up the hierarchy, he looks across the dinner table. Instead of asking who actually has power over my life, he is encouraged to ask, who am I supposed to have power over? That's how a hierarchy reproduces itself. And that's why I think this argument deserves serious consideration. Maybe the fundamental architect of patriarchy isn't simple, men over women. Maybe it's powerful men over less powerful men, over women, over children. A pyramid. And like every pyramid, there's a whole lot more humanity holding up the bottom than sitting comfortably at the top. So maybe the liberation conversation needs to become bigger. Women should absolutely be liberated from patriarchal domination. But ordinary men also need liberation from a definition of masculinity that tells them that their value lies in how much they can produce, endure, suppress, fight, and sacrifice. Because if somebody can convince you that destroying yourself proves you're a man, they don't have to enslave you. They just have to tell you that your chains are masculinity. It's the open eye. WHGE 95.3 FM, the open eye. Children of the sun, somebody needs to ask a very simple question. Where the hell is the money? Where the hell is the money? Because the United States pours nearly $1 trillion a year into national defense, yet families of sailors aboard the USS Abraham Lincoln are describing exhausted service members, poor food, laundry problems, sanitation problems, months beyond their expected deployment. And sailors reportedly trying to throw themselves overboard. Where the hell is the money? Well, judging from that last press conference that I saw Pete Hegseth attend, standing on the side. Pete Hegseth, his own mama said he trash. Standing up there, wiping his nose and pulling his hair back. So some of that goddamn money went up his nose. Cokehead son of a bitch. Where the hell is the money? Military Times confirms that multiple sailors aboard the Lincoln have attempted to go overboard during this extended deployment. Although the Navy has declined to say precisely how many, the carrier is now in its 9th month at sea. And think about that. We can finance aircraft carriers. We can finance fighter jets. We could finance missiles costing millions of dollars apiece. We could finance contractors, consultants, weapons manufacturers, and military technology that sounds like something out of Star Wars. But apparently we can't reliably wash a soldier's damn clothes, feed them properly, maintain basic living conditions, and get exhausted people home on schedule. So again, where the hell is the money? See, that's what a lot of people ain't asking. And don't tell me it is not enough. This is simply a question of how much America spends on defense. This is not simply a question of how much America spends on defense. It is a question of where that enormous amount of money goes. Who controls it? Who profits from it? And why the people actually doing the fighting so often seem to be standing at the end of the line? Because the Pentagon's own auditors have been waving red flags for years. The Department of Defense received another disclaimer of opinion on its department-wide financial audit for the fiscal year 2024. And it gets worse. The Defense Department Inspector General reported that during just the last 2 quarters of fiscal 2024, the Pentagon reported $245 billion in accounting adjustments that were unsupported or improperly approved. $245 billion. The Inspector General warned that those unsupported adjustments call into question the integrity of the financial statements. That means somebody stole the goddamn money. Understand what I'm saying? That does not mean somebody stole $245 billion outright. An audit disclaimer doesn't prove the money disappeared into somebody's pocket. But it damn sure means the American people have every right to demand, where the hell is the money? Because Pentagon auditors have also identified serious weaknesses in tracking assets, including equipment, ships, vehicles, and spare parts. The Pentagon's own 2025 audit explanation says accurate asset accounting is necessary so that supplies and equipment are actually available when the military needs them. Whoop, there it is. That's the connection nobody wants to talk about. A military budget isn't supposed to be a giant welfare program for defense contractors. Where the money? The purpose is supposed to be defending the country and supporting the people we send to do it. And those sailors are not machines. They're human beings that got wives, husbands, children, mothers, fathers. People sitting at home wondering whether somebody they love is going to come back physically and psychologically intact. When sailors are reportedly becoming so overwhelmed that some are attempting to go overboard, that is not something you dismiss with public relations language about readiness and resilience. That's a 5-alarm warning. And what do cokehead Hexef say? Oh, well, the conditions are being completely misrepresented. That's Washington's favorite weapon, spit. And his coked up ass spitting so hard, it's a wonder he ain't dizzy. How is he not? Because he sure as hell looked dizzy in that press conference. Spit. Don't address the damn problem, attack the description of the problem. Call the families reporting this liars. Them families are talking, them sailors are talking. Military Times is reporting it. And the Navy itself acknowledges multiple incidents involving sailors attempting to go overboard. So apparently everybody is misrepresenting what's happening except the people sitting comfortably in Washington coat the fuck up. Oh, Lord. And this is what happens when political theater becomes more important than competent administration. You can stand behind a podium talking about warrior ethos all damn day. You can pound your chest. You can talk tough. You can scream about how lethal the military is. You can tell America how badass the military is. But leadership isn't measured by how tough you sound on television. And you don't sound too damn tough when you hide up. Leadership is measured by what happens to the people under your command. It's beyond incompetence. If sailors are exhausted, take care of them. If they're hungry, you're supposed to feed them. If equipment is breaking, you're supposed to repair it. If the sanitation systems are failing, you fix them. If deployment schedules have been unsustainable, relieve them. And if sailors are reaching a point where they would rather jump ship into the ocean to spend another day aboard that ship, don't you dare stand in front of America and tell us the problem is being exaggerated. Find out why the hell this is going on, because you already know. Because these sailors are expendable pieces of somebody's geopolitical chessboard. And this is the obscenity of the whole thing. America always seems to have unlimited money for war. And somehow there isn't enough money for the warrior. There's always money for another missile, another weapons contract, another bombing campaign, another military adventure. But when the human beings carrying out those policies need decent food, functioning facilities, adequate rest, mental health care, and a reasonable deployment rotation, suddenly the greatest military machine on earth starts looking like it can't organize a goddamn laundry room. So I want congressional hearings. I want inspector generals crawling through the books. I want every contractor held accountable. I want to know where the money was appropriated, where it was spent, what it was delivered, what wasn't delivered, and who got paid anyway. Because supporting the troops doesn't mean putting a yellow ribbon on your bumper. Supporting the troops means supporting the troops. Not Lockheed Martin, not Raytheon, not General Dynamics, not some contractor's quarterly earnings, the people. The sailor working another exhausted ship, the Marine wondering when he's coming home, the spouse staring at the telephone, the child counting the months since mom or dad left. Those are the people that trillion-dollar military apparatus is supposed to serve. And if America can build a multi-billion-dollar aircraft carrier capable of projecting military power halfway around the planet, but cannot keep the human beings aboard that carrier fed, rested, supplied, healthy, and sane, and we don't just have a spending problem. We have an accountability problem. We have a priorities problem. We have a leadership problem. And quite possibly buried somewhere beneath mountains of contracts, accounting adjustments, and Pentagon bureaucracy, we have a corruption problem. So don't give me another press conference. Don't give me another slogan. Don't give me another Fox News style performance about how strong and lethal America is. Show me the books. Where the supplies? How did the conditions get like this? Show me that the sailor's being taken care of. Because somebody has to explain how America could spend staggering funds on its military while soldiers deployed aboard one of the most powerful warships ever constructed are reportedly living under deteriorating conditions. And I'm going to keep asking the question Washington hates. Where the hell is the money? I'm Patrice Gibbs. This is The Open Eye. WHGE 95.3 FM. This is the Open Eye. Yeah, I had no problem talking about something that makes you uncomfortable. And that's what I'm going to do right now. Who gets to have their suffering recognized as universal, and whose suffering is treated like a footnote? I keep hearing some version of this command. Stop comparing American slavery to the Holocaust. And I reject the premise behind it. Not because the Holocaust wasn't horrific, it was. The systematic persecution and murder of 6 million Jews by Nazi Germany was one of humanity's greatest crimes. Millions of other people, including Roma, disabled people, political prisoners, Soviet POWs, and others targeted by a Nazi regime, were also persecuted and killed. And we don't have to minimize any of that. But neither do I have to minimize my history to properly respect somebody else's. As an African in America, I exist today speaking English, carrying the English surname, separated by generations from the African language, ethnic identities, family histories, and homelands of ancestors who were kidnapped, trafficked, sold, bred, raped, beaten, eaten, exploited, and legally reduced to property. So don't tell me that I have to put somebody else's historical suffering on a pedestal before I'm permitted to talk about my own. Human suffering is not the Olympics. There's no medal for genocide. And there's no world championship for atrocity. And there damn sure shouldn't be a hierarchy determining whose ancestors deserve the most tears. See, we grew up in a culture where the Holocaust was taught with extraordinary seriousness. Oh, we learned about Anne Frank. We saw documentaries. We heard survivors. We learned the number 6 million. 6 million, 6 million. And teaching the history matters. It should be taught. Never again should mean never again. And here's my question. Why wasn't the Middle Passage taught with that intensity? Why weren't the slave ships? Why weren't the plantations? Why weren't the children sold away from their mothers? Why weren't the rapes? Why wasn't the cannibalism? Why weren't the lynching photographs? Why weren't the massacres? Why wasn't King Leopold's atrocities in the Congo? Why weren't the Heraho and Nama genocide in German Southwest Africa? Why wasn't colonialism taught as the enormous and international system of racialized violence, death, forced labor, and cultural destruction that it was? And why weren't we taught more about black people who themselves suffered under Nazi racial ideology and persecution? That's the issue. Not that Jewish suffering receives too much humanity. Black suffering has historically received too little. And that's the important question, the important distinction. When barbarism comes home, Aimé Césaire made a devastating observation in Discourse on Colonialism. Europe had practiced conquest, racial hierarchy, forced labor, mass killings, and dehumanization against colonialized people for generations. Then fascism brought racialized barbarism into Europe itself. Suddenly, techniques of domination that Europeans had tolerated when inflicted upon Africans, Asians, indigenous peoples, and colonized populations became an existential crisis when turned inward. That's the Eurocentric hierarchy I'm talking about. When millions suffered in Africa, it was called colonial administration. When indigenous civilizations were destroyed, it was called expansion. When Africans were enslaved for generations, it became commerce. But when industrialized racial terror consumed Europe, the world correctly called it an unspeakable crime against humanity. My question is, why weren't they all treated as crimes against humanity from the gate? American slavery wasn't just something that happened. And America particularly doesn't get to lecture black people about how we're supposed to remember slavery. Because the Holocaust happened in Europe. American slavery happened right here. Our ancestors cleared the land. They built the roads, worked the plantations, raised crops, built fortunes, produced cotton, generated wealth, and helped create the economic foundation upon which the United States developed. And when slavery officially ended, there was no national program of meaningful reparations. Instead came black codes, convict leasing, Jim Crow, lynchings, disenfranchisement, segregation, housing discrimination, redlining, employment discrimination, and later policies that helped produce enormous racial disparities and wealth that continue right into today. America didn't simply close the slavery account. America refinanced the debt and sent the bill to black people. That's why telling black Americans to get over slavery is so insulting. Get over what? We're still arguing about the consequences. Now we come to Palestine. This is where never again has to mean something larger than tribal memory. The historical persecution of Jewish people cannot become a moral blank check for any modern government. Jewish people are not synonymous with the Israeli government. Judaism is not synonymous with Zionism. And criticism of the Israeli state policy is not automatically hatred of Jewish people. The suffering of Jewish people during the Holocaust should make humanity more sensitive to suffering of civilians everywhere, including Palestinians subjected to displacement, military occupation, destruction, hunger, and death. Otherwise, never again becomes never again for us. And that is not a universal moral principle. That principle must be never again to anybody. And black suffering is not a footnote. My ancestors lost names, languages, religion, family connections, homelands, freedom, labor, and sometimes their very humanity in the eyes of the law. Their descendants survived slavery only to face another century of state-sanctioned racial oppression. State-sanctioned. So yes, I become suspicious when somebody tells me one historical atrocity is simply beyond comparison while simultaneously treating centuries of African enslavement and colonial destruction as ancient history that black people need to stop talking about. Oh, hell no. Like I heard a sister say, the Holocaust is simply the greatest atrocity on film. And we need to talk about all of it. The Holocaust, the transatlantic slave trade, indigenous genocide, the Congo, the Herero and Nama genocide, Armenia, Cambodia, Rwanda, Bosnia, and every other place where human beings convinced themselves that another group was sufficiently inferior, dangerous, foreign, or inconvenient that their humanity no longer mattered. Because that's where atrocity begins, with that ideal. Those people's suffering doesn't matter as much as ours. That's the poison. There is no suffering scoreboard. I refuse to participate in a competition between dead people. I will not diminish African suffering to honor Jewish suffering. At the same time, I'm not going to ignore Palestinian suffering because acknowledging it makes somebody politically uncomfortable. That's how you get the political litmus test in America. Do you support the existence of Israel? Hell no. And I will not accept a Eurocentric ranking system that determines which dead bodies deserve monuments, museums, school curriculum, reparative justice, and international remembrance, and which ones get a paragraph in the back of the textbook. Because every victim was somebody's child. Every stolen life mattered. Every family destroyed mattered. Every culture attacked mattered. Every people stripped of their humanity mattered. So don't ask me which atrocity was worse. That's the more important question. What kind of world keeps producing these atrocities? And why do human beings keep discovering reasons why those people over there don't deserve the same humanity we demand for ourselves? That's the lesson history should have taught. Not never again for me, not never again for my people, but never again. Children of the sun, our humanity does not require somebody else's dehumanization. Their history does not erase ours. There's enough truth to mourn everybody. There's enough justice demanded to demand it for everybody. And there's enough, or there should be enough humanity to understand that no people's suffering should ever become the justification for inflicting suffering on another people. Stay black. Keep your eye open. WHGE 95.3 FM. Let me explain something to you about hate. Two white Florida middle school students, 14-year-old Julian Davis and 13-year-old Charles Williams, were taken into custody after authorities were tipped off that they were allegedly planning an armed robbery. And that's not even the most disturbing part. According to reports, when authorities searched the children's homes, they found materials promoting white supremacist ideology, including drawings, references to the so-called Great Replacement theory, symbols, and other extremist material. Okay? Let me explain here. Hate has a home address. Every time we see young people wrapped up in this racist or extremist ideology, somebody immediately says, oh, it's the internet. Oh, the internet did it. Social media did it. TikTok did it. YouTube did it. And yeah, the internet can absolutely radicalize people. It could take an angry, confused 13-year-old and put him inside an extremist echo chamber before his parents even know what happened. Now stop pretending the internet invaded racism. It didn't. Because before there was a broadband, there was the dinner table. Before there were algorithms, there were parents. Before there was a message board, there were living rooms and big-time stories. Before children could download white supremacy onto a phone, somebody could teach them face-to-face. And that's the conversation America doesn't want to have. 2 Florida middle school students, 13 and 14, taken into custody. But what should everybody pay attention to is what authorities reportedly encountered when they investigated further. Material associated with white supremacist ideology, including references to the so-called Great Replacement theory. Yeah. Where they learn that? Where they learn this? Because children don't naturally come into this world worried about replacement theory. A baby doesn't come out of the womb concerned about immigration. A 7-year-old doesn't independently develop a theory about maintaining white demographic dominance. Because somebody teaches children who belongs. Somebody teaches them who doesn't. Somebody teaches them who supposedly deserves what. And that education doesn't always begin with somebody wearing a hood and burning a cross. Sometimes it sounds perfectly casual. Look at what they're doing to our country. Everything is about black people now. White people can't say anything anymore. Damn it, these immigrants are taking over. They're giving everything to minorities. We're becoming strangers in our own country. See, that's how the seed is planted. Then that child gets online and the algorithm says, oh, you're interested in that? Let me show you more. See, when I was growing up, we didn't have television, but what we had was white people watching All in the Family and putting the Archie Bunker and saying, he's right, you know. I remember an associate of mine, white guy, told me he had to tell his father, All in the Family is not a documentary. Now the racial resentment he heard casually expressed at home has a vocabulary. It has meanings. It has symbols. It has statistics stripped of context. It has influencers. It has conspiracy theories. And it has a community. And eventually, it has an ideology. The internet didn't necessarily create the hatred. It industrialized it. See, that's the important distinction. Because blaming everything on social media allows adults to escape the responsibility that they had in this. It allows families to say, oh, well, we don't know where he learned that. And maybe you don't. But America also needs to examine what children hear when adults think they're not listening. Children hear the racial jokes. They hear Uncle Whoever at Thanksgiving. They hear what's said when the television news comes on. And they hear how their parents describe the black neighborhood. They hear how immigrants are discussed. They hear what's said about Jewish people. They hear the anger over interracial relationships. They hear adults complain that minorities are taking over. Children are listening. And when America acts shocked, when some of them take those ideals further than the adults who introduced them. That's how extremism can work. One generation whispers the prejudice. The next generation says it out loud. And somebody after that decides to act on it. So yeah, investigate the websites. Investigate the chat rooms. Investigate the algorithms. Investigate the extremist organizations recruiting children. But don't stop at the Wi-Fi router. Look around the house. Listen to the conversations. Examine what children are being taught about race before they ever type their first search into Google. Because white supremacy didn't begin on the internet. America was producing white supremacists centuries before anybody had a smartphone. The internet can provide the gasoline, but somebody much closer to home struck the first match. This is the Open Eye. Get rid of the air. All right. WHGE 95.3 FM. This is the Open Eye. This is a message for America, especially white America. And it needs to be said without whispering, without softening, without the usual polite detours. Dear white people, how many white bodies have you seen hanging from a tree? Not in rumor, not in folklore, not in some imagined both sides fantasy. Not on one of them westerns from the 70s. In real American history. You haven't. Because that's not how white people were terrorized in this country. But for black Americans, the image of a body hanging from a tree is not a metaphor. It's not a symbol. It's not a scene from a movie. It's history. It's terror. It's lynching. And let's stop pretending we don't know who did this. Black people are not walking into the woods like zombies in some apocalypse film, stringing themselves up. Black people are not staging elaborate suicides in remote forests. Black people are not reenacting their own historical trauma. Look at history. Look at the photographs. Look at the crowds. Who dragged black men out of their homes? Who kidnapped black women from jail cells? Who ambushed black boys on dirt roads? Who tied the rope? Threw it over the branching pool. White mobs, ordinary white citizens, not fringe extremists, not mythical monsters, neighbors, shopkeepers, deputies, church deacons, business owners, people who went home afterwards and slept well. And yeah, the Ku Klux Klan, a violent extremist organization responsible for terror, murder, and racial violence, played a major role. But they were not alone. Plenty of white Americans who never wore a hood participated, watched, cheered, or posed for photographs. And that's not an opinion, that's documented fact. And where did lynchings happen? Not just in the woods, not just in the shadows. They happen in town squares, on courthouse lawns, on Main Street, in public parks, on bridges, behind churches, and fields owned by respectable families. And yeah, in the woods where the trees still remember. Black people were not wandering into these spaces voluntarily. They were taken there by force, by mobs, by people who believed the law belonged to them and them alone. Why does that matter today? Because black Americans see a body hanging from a tree, even in a photograph, even in a textbook, even in a movie. It's a nerve that white America rarely acknowledges. This happened to us, and this was done by you. And it was done openly, proudly, repeatedly, and legally protected. Black Americans carry that memory. White Americans carry the silence. And silence is not innocence. Silence is inheritance. So dear white people, before you rush to say that was a long time ago, before you insist not all white people, before you try to soften the truth with comfort or distance, ask yourself, why is the image of a lynched black body so familiar in black history and so unimaginable in white history? That difference is not accidental, it's structural. It's intentional. It is the legacy of racial terror that shaped this country. And black people are still living with the echo and the reality. It wasn't that long ago. How dare you? Because it's happening right now. And for those of you that don't realize it, don't know it, America is at war. Play strange fruit is still relevant. This is Open Eye. WHGE 95.3 FM. How many of you know this quote? How many of you are aware of this? I favor integration on buses and in all areas of public accommodation and travel. I'm for equality. However, I think integration in our public schools is different. In that setting, you're dealing with one of the most important assets of an individual, the mind. White people view black people as inferior. A large percentage of them have a very low opinion of our race. A large percentage. People with such a low view of the black race cannot be given free rein and put in charge of the intellectual care and development of our boys and girls. Dr. King. What Dr. King said in the 1960s wasn't abstract theory. It was lived truth. And in cities like Wilmington, it was the truth black parents had already learned the hard way. He warned America that you cannot hand the minds of black children to people who do not believe in their brilliance. And that warning sits at the center of why so many black parents, including my mother, oppose school busing. Because before busing, before the grand social experiments, before the promises of equal opportunity, black educators were already doing the work. They were turning out college-ready students with substandard resources, outdated textbooks, hand-me-down lab equipment, and buildings white officials barely bothered to maintain. And still, those children walked out prepared, confident, disciplined, and academically strong. So when the government came along and said, oh, we're going to fix inequality by scattering your children across town, black parents asked a simple question. Why not desegregate the resources instead of dismantling success we already built? My mother understood something policymakers refused to see. Black schools weren't failing. They were succeeding in spite of everything stacked against them. Black teachers weren't the problem. They were the backbone of black intellectual life. Black children weren't broken. They were thriving under adults who loved them, believed in them, and demanded excellence from them. Busing didn't address the real issue. The real issue was that white institutions hoarded resources while black institutions were expected to perform miracles with scraps. So Mom's stance was clear, principled, and rooted in experience. Desegregate the resources, we'll educate our own children. And that wasn't separatism, that was self-respect. That was community intelligence. That was a refusal to surrender black children to systems that didn't value them. It was the same protective realism King voiced when he said you cannot entrust the minds of black children to people who believe they are inferior. He wasn't rejecting integration. He was rejecting the fantasy that integration alone could overcome deeply rooted prejudice. Black parents like my mother saw the same danger. They saw that busing didn't guarantee respect. It didn't guarantee high expectations. It didn't guarantee safety, dignity, or cultural affirmation. But they did know what black educators guaranteed: belief in black potential, culturally grounded teaching, discipline rooted in love, not suspicion, history taught with pride, not erasure, expectations set high, not love. This is the part of the story America rarely tells. Black schools were producing excellence. Black teachers were producing scholars. Black communities were producing futures. And instead of strengthening those institutions, the country chose to scatter black children into environments where they were too often misunderstood, underestimated, or just outright mistreated. So when we revisit King's words today, we should hear them in full. Integration without justice is exposure. Integration without equality is harm. Integration without resources is sabotage. And when we revisit the stance black parents like my mom, we should recognize it for what it is: a defense of black educational power, a demand for fairness, a refusal to let white supremacy masquerade as progress. Because the truth is simple: black children didn't need saving, black schools didn't need dismantling, black educators didn't need replacing. They needed resources, the same resources white schools took for granted. And had America chosen that path, we might be telling a real different story today. This is the Open Eye. WHGE 95.3 FM. Let me keep this going here. All right. I want to tell you something. The internet is having a full-blown meltdown over a Florida mom who dared to do the unthinkable: parent her children with structure. This mother goes viral for making her kids read 2 hours a day, work out 2 hours a day, and banning TV until 3 p.m. And some of these folks are acting like she running a boot camp instead of a household. What we're watching right now is a cultural collision, the clash between discipline and distraction, between parents who set standards and parents who outsource childhood to screens. This woman lays out a summer schedule that frankly looks a whole lot like many of us grew up with. Outside, active, engaged, and using your brain instead of applause. she gets backlash. People online are calling her too strict, controlling, even cruel. Cruel? For making kids read? For making them move their bodies? For limiting TV until mid-afternoon? Cruel? Let's be honest, what's really happening is that a generation of adults who grew up on unlimited screen time and minimal expectations feel personally attacked by the ideal of structure. They're not mad at her. They're mad at the mirror she's holding up. Meanwhile, this mother comes with receipts. Honor roll, robotics programs, soccer medals, family trips, healthy, active kids. She's not bragging. She's proving a point. Discipline produces outcomes. And outcomes shut down criticism. And here's the bigger story. We've normalized a childhood where kids spend 8 to 10 hours a day on screens, barely go outside, struggle to focus for more than a few minutes. So when a parent pushes back, when a parent says, no, my kids will read, my kids will move, my kids will grow. The internet calls that extreme. So what's extreme? What's extreme is thinking childhood should be a 24/7 entertainment buffet. This mother isn't doing too much. She's doing what too many parents stop doing. Setting expectations, enforcing boundaries, and preparing her kids for a world that rewards discipline, not distraction. And the loudest critics, they're not defending children. They're defending comfort. Yeah. See, sometimes I've got to remind you that sometimes the thing people call too much, that's exactly what's missing. Exactly what's missing. That's word. Now, I'm going to tell you something. When I think about Wilmington Summers on Rodney Street, I think about a childhood that taught you everything school didn't. Clayton Street Park was the gym. The neighborhood was your classroom. You learned independence by living it. You learn problem solving by doing it. You learn basic knowledge because life required it. You knew your address. You knew your phone number. You knew how to call 911. You knew how to write a sentence because you wrote letters, filled out forms, and talked to adults. Nobody called it learning. It was just childhood. But listen to what these teachers are saying now, loudly, painfully, and with tears in their eyes. These kids cannot read. They can't write. They can't spell. They can't even tell time. They can't do math, science, history. These aren't little kids. I'm talking about middle schoolers, high schoolers, students on full college ride. One teacher said his singers, couldn't fill in 4 words of a sentence he practically completed for them. Another said students don't know their middle name, last name, addresses, phone numbers, or how to address an envelope. Not one student said they call 911 if they're in trouble. Not one said. But they know TikTok. They know Instagram. They know how to scroll for 8 hours straight. And they look good. Designer clothes, $200 shoes, the whole presentation. Presentation without preparation is just decoration. And while this collapse is happening in real time, look at what's being done to the system that's supposed to save them. Libraries are removing books, not because they're dangerous, but because they're inconvenient. Removed for racism, removed for bigotry, removed for classism. Not to fight those things, but to hide them, to erase them, to pretend they never existed. Critical thinking is being framed as indoctrination. Science is being framed as conspiracy. Facts are being framed as oppression. Education itself is being framed as a threat. And while all this is happening, budgets are being slashed. Teachers are leaving. Schools are starving. And the same people defunding education are blaming teachers for the results. But when a mother says, my kids will read for 2 hours, move for 2 hours, and no screens until 3, people call her extreme. They call her controlling. They call her cruel. But look at the reality. Screens have replaced summers. Screens have replaced learning. Screens have replaced curiosity. And screens have replaced childhood. Back on Rodney Street, boredom was the engine of imagination. Clayton Street Park was the curriculum. The neighborhood taught you what school didn't have time to teach, and the city gave you the skills you needed to survive. Today, 2 hours away from a screen feels like punishment. But a generation ago, 4 hours outside was just another Tuesday. So when people say that mother is doing too much, I say she's doing what Wilmington used to do automatically. Push kids out into the world and let them grow. Because if we don't reclaim that, if we don't fight for education, for literacy, for curiosity, for truth, then the tears of that teacher won't be the last. They'll be the beginning. And reminding you that childhood didn't used to be something you watched through a screen. It was something you lived. And education didn't used to be a battleground. It was a lifeline. I'm Patrice Gibbs. This is The Open Eye. WHGE 95.3 FM. I hope you learned something, because I learned something before I got here. And as we close today's Open Eye, remember this. Clarity is not an end point, it's a beginning. Seeing the truth doesn't solve the problem. It equips you to confront it. And every time you choose to look instead of look away, you reclaim a piece of your agency in a world that profits from your distraction. The Open Eye is not here to tell you what to think. It's here to remind you that thinking is still your power. That memory is still your inheritance. That awareness is still your shield. And that silence, especially now, is a luxury our communities cannot afford. So carry today's clarity with you. Let it unsettle you where it should. Strengthen you where it must, and guide you where it can. And when the world tries to close your eyes again, open them wider. So until next time, stay woke. Keep your eye open. And as we always tell you, destiny determines who enters your life, but you decide who stays. Therefore, value those who value you, and don't treat those as a priority who treat you as an option. I'm Patrice Gibbs. This has been The Open Eye. Peace and love. Thanks for joining us. All right. Yes, that's the end of the show for today. Hope you learned something. And oh no, I haven't forgot. I will not forget. Global African supremacy. Because the world was a much better place, obviously, when the African ruled. Peace.